Let's jump into the answer for our skills challenge. Last week, I had you run an automated attack on your account from one of my accounts, and that was just to generate log messages so that we can actually walk through and learn a little bit more about running our queries. Now, the guiding light that I use for this, and let me pull it up here to show you, is that recipe picks blog post that I wrote a long time ago. I'm a paramedic and I'm a pilot. And in both of those fields, we use mnemonics as memory devices. So I really like having those. It's not an acronym, it's a mnemonic, so that I don't forget anything as I'm walking through an algorithm or as I'm walking through a checklist. That's where it comes from. And that's a really good starting point for us for incident response. So recipe picks is my mnemonic for where to get started with incident response when you have something occurring in cloud. Let's just go dive right in right away because we've got a lot to cover. And I'm going to walk you through this start to finish for how I would walk through the process. Now, remember, this is just the skills solution. This is not meant to instruct you completely on the cloud incident response process. We're still in that familiarization stage. Okay, with that said, your starting point, if you have done all of our labs, is check your email because we set up Security Hub to forward any alerts from any Amazon security tool to our email address. And in this case, you're going to find a Security Hub alert because it is feeding in an Access Analyzer finding. And in my case, this came over really fast. It came over, I think, within about 5 or 10 minutes, possibly less because I wasn't monitoring my email. Here is what that email would look like. You can see that I have my Security Hub finding for Access Analyzer, and you'll see the long string here for what was found. And what I'm looking for in here, and eventually I'll find it, is the snapshot ID. So this is basically saying that I have a public snapshot, and I want to find that snapshot ID. All right. And yep. And I'm checking my date here. Yeah, it's still from this morning. I've run this a few times, so my log files are going to be a little bit rougher than yours. Now, in this case, this would tell me what the account ID is. I just know offhand what the account ID is because that's where we've been running all of these. So go into that account because if I go over the recipe picks, the first thing I want to do is look at what is the current configuration of the resource. Now, here's an important two other memory devices. There's two phrases that I use to guide a lot of my incident response, and they come right out from my work as a paramedic, which is going to be obvious in a second. The first of those is sick or not sick. In other words, is this very bad or is this something that I've got a little bit more time with? And that's like when I walk in to look at a patient, do they look like they're going to die in front of me or are they just kind of like stub their toe or, and believe me, I have been called for a lot less severe than stubbing a toe. The next is stop the bleed. If something is bad, if the patient is sick, is there something I need to do right away so that they don't get any worse? And I'm going to use those two phrases as I walk through this process. Okay, going back into my account, we're going to go into test account 1, administrator access, and I already know it's going to be a snapshot. And that snapshot ID, before I forget, let's go paste that onto a sheet here so that I've got that available to me. And I'm going to revalidate that snapshot ID here in a second. To see snapshots, we go into EC2, and then we go into snapshots. And you can see I have my delete me, 2BF, and it's 2BF here. So those snapshot IDs are matching. I'm going to click on this snapshot. And if I look at it, I already know it's going to be public. So snapshot settings, this one is public. I would say sick or not sick. Well, I don't know the origin of the snapshot yet. We're going to get to that. But at this point right now, let's imagine that I have a policy that says there shouldn't be any public snapshots. Thus, I am going to go and remediate this one. I'm going to modify the permissions and make this snapshot private right away. So now I've stopped the bleed. It's not going to get any worse, although as you're going to see, there's more to look at. So we've done our resource, and now we want to get every API call involving this particular resource. Well, I've already done this here. And by the way, in a real incident, I'd be investigating a lot more about that snapshot, and I'm going to talk about that a little later. Let's close that. And we're going to go into now looking at our logs. So we're going to go to security audit, security full admin, And once I'm in here, I'm going to be copying and pasting off of the original blog post, but you'll be able to get all of these, and we'll go to Athena. You'll be able to get all of these from the blog post associated with this particular lab. And I want to swap in my snapshot ID because I already have this initial query. So this initial query, getting all of the event names, is the query that we did last week. It's the same one here. And the only reason I'm editing it is I ran it last week, and you may actually have the correct snapshot ID still in here because that was saved. And I want to delete that extra quote at the end that's in my clipboard. There. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to run this, and it's going to show me the entire history of this particular query. I'm going to click run, and for time's sake, I'm going to pause it because, as you all know, it's going to take about 45 seconds. We have our results, and as you can see, for this particular snapshot, I've got 11 results here. Okay, so first there is the create the snapshot. And remember, what we're looking at is the request parameters and the response elements. So I can see here that there was a create, and then it was tagged, then a describe, 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 describe. Now, when you see those, that is almost always indicative of somebody using the console. Even the API calls will do this sometimes. This is AWS going, is it ready yet? 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 Now, once all of that is done, we get into the second block of what's going on here. And this is just stuff I know. Again, I'm going quickly. This is more about understanding the queries and the results. We're modifying an attribute. And the attribute that is modified, we're going to get to a little bit later as we go through the entire call. The main thing I want you to understand is that modifying an attribute, if I pull the entire request parameters, would tell us that that attribute is what makes it public. So I just happen to know that that's what makes it public. Okay, so we have our initial information here. And now let's go back to our incident analysis. So we have the events, and now we want to track the changes. So this is the before and the after state. Now, we're not really going to have this because we don't have our environment set up to track the before and the after state. But you can see from the API calls, it was a new snapshot, and that new snapshot was then immediately made public. So we know it was not public. Now it's public. In a deeper incident, there's a lot more to look at here, and you're probably going to have to use other tools. Now we want the identity structure. So who made the actual identity, who made the API call? That's all in that user identity element, and we need to figure that out. So let's go back into our query. As you can see here, I don't have that in my query results. Well, quick fix. Oh no, we do have it. Select the user identity, the ARN of the user. So you can see here that it is a user. And so I know that's an IAM user. It is not a role. And that IAM user is named S.L.A.W demo and gives me that information. So that's a weird IAM username. As you guys know, that's just what we set up as part of this. So at this point in time, we know the user that did this, and we know the API calls that user made. They created a snapshot, and then they went ahead and they modified the snapshot attributes. You'll also see in your logs, if you take a look here, that Access Analyzer was also doing certain things. And then the Security Hub role was also doing certain things. So that's that back end, that kind of automated stuff that's occurring on there. And then there's this weird create tags that came from someplace. So we'll need to go ahead and deal with that. But right now we kind of have a good sense of that create tags was actually me in the console making a manual change is my assumption there. Because remember that I went ahead and I reversed the change that occurred. So creating the snapshot and going through it. So let's look at some of our other queries here. Now, the next thing I want to do is what are the permissions of the calling identity? And I've got some queries and stuff here and things that can be done. You can read the blog post, but we're going to do this another way. I'm going to just go log into the console. I know my IAM user, who that is. So I'm not even, let me go ahead and actually I'll copy the full ARN, and that gives me that account of that IAM user. And we will paste that into here. and I'm going to look at it in the browser. So I've got to close that Athena window. We're going to go back into our test account 1, and we're going to look at that IAM user. We'll go into IAM, and within IAM, we're going to go, we see we have one user here, and it's that S.L.A.W demo user. So what I want to see at this point is, if I go back to what I described here, is what are the permissions that that IAM user has. And so in this case, there's a policy here, and this is not too bad. So this allows it to get its own username. Normally, I wouldn't provide that permission, so that's a little suspicious here. It can describe all of the instances and volumes and snapshots and attributes here. It can snapshot anything, and it can modify any snapshot attribute. This, in terms of sick or not sick, is something that I would consider sick. Stop the bleed. I don't know who this IAM user is. I don't know who created this IAM user, and it's got a lot of permissions that can actually create snapshots and make them public for anything in my environment. So that's a little risky here. And again, this is a very contrived scenario, and those are the permissions that that this needed. Now, in a real incident response, I'd start running down this user a lot more. But again, we're going to today just focus on the simple based on the queries here. So I'll go back to our cheat sheet. So I now know that the permissions of the calling identity, that has permissions to view and take snapshots of anything in my environment. The next is the entitlements. And the difference here is, does the thing that's been modified have any permissions itself? And so the entitlements are like, does that resource have an IAM role? Now, in this case, there's something interesting, because if you look at what this can do, it can just do snapshots and stuff of all the instances. I would normally look at my instance, and let's go ahead and actually do that just for completion's sake. So I'm going to go to the instance itself. We're going to see if it has any permissions, because that means, hey, if the attacker get in, they could modify something else. Now, the reason I'm not totally worried is taking a snapshot and then running that, exporting that data, that's not going to give you any of the permissions of that instance. In here, we actually don't have, oops, let's take this away. You can see that there was a terminated instance here. So I had to turn off that filter. And if I look at this instance, and where did security go? IAM role. It has no IAM role, so that instance had no privileges, which means it couldn't do anything else in my account. So I'm good on that front. Okay. Going back into public. Well, we already know that it was public, and we already fixed that, and we got that done right away. Well, let's look at some other API calls that came from that same particular source. So we're going to copy this query out, and I'm going to close this out. And we're going to go back into our logs. And from the logs here, back into Athena. And we're going to just pop open a tab for a new query. So this new query, I'm going to paste that in. And there's a couple of things I'm going to have to swap in there. So the first is my table name is going to need to go right there. And I will copy the table name, paste the table name. And I'm going to need that source IP address for where this originated from. Where do I get that? Well, I get that from down here, source IP address. Now, my suspicion is this isn't going to be, let's see what we get before I say that. But I've done this quite a bit over the years, and we'll run that query. Now, while that query is running, I'm just going to look up that IP address as well. What is my IP? And we'll go into an IP checker, and we'll just put that in that top search window. And you see that's an Amazon IP address, and it's in US West 1, Oregon. So it's not even an EC2 instance. I just happen to know that it wouldn't be an EC2 instance. It's a Lambda function running inside of an EC2 instance. Not super helpful. So we know that that attack originated from within AWS. Going back into my query results, you can see that we have all sorts of results. This one took 41 milliseconds to run, and we have the creating log stream. So this is all the stuff that happened automatically from our Lambda function. And with a little more investigation, I would figure that out. But that's a key indicator there. It's just telling me it was a Lambda function that was running. So it was something that was running within AWS. Now, in a real incident, I'd be running down how was that Lambda function created, who owned it. Again, that is a much deeper process. We are going to run this scenario in the future, this exact same one in that deeper process. But today, we're just working on our familiarization and our queries. So I know where the API calls originated from, and it came from within AWS, and I know it came from an IAM function. Now, what else did that calling identity do, that IAM user? So this is a cool one here. Let's see. User identity equals username, or let's go with the deeper one here. Actually, I'll just pull this top one. So either one of these queries can work. These are different ones based on username, based on role name. In this case, we do have the username. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to just open it up as another query window, paste it in, and have to do my from. So I'll just get that from here. Paste that, paste that there. And I need that username, which we know is in that first query results. And the username will be right there. Copy that username. Remember, user means IAM user, as different from IAM role. And this one is meant to focus on that username, run the query. And I'm going to pause as it takes its 45 seconds. That query ran, and you can see from that given IP address, well, we've got a lot of info. Get caller identity. So now you can see more than we saw before. Before, we were looking at the query that told us the API calls on that instance. Now we're seeing everything that IAM user has done. And I have to be careful because actually, no, it should be limited to just this. Yeah, because I've run this a few times with that same name. We did it based on the name, so you notice some IP address changes and some time changes. But you can see that they also did a get caller identity, which is always suspicious. It's the who am I call. So it means that they don't know what their permissions are. You can see that described instances, and it was describing just one particular instance. That's because I have this hard coded to limit any potential damage. So now I have everything that user did, and you can kind of look at that yourself. Now it's going to be a little bit different. You can do it based on ARN. You could use it based on an access key and a secret key. There's a bunch of different ways to run those queries. So what we're doing now is we are tracking that user to see if they did anything that could pivot to a different account. And all we see here is that IAM user figured out, okay, who am I? Let's see if I can describe instances. Let's create snapshots. Remember, my logs are dirtier than yours because I have run this multiple times. Creating tags. So it was tagging that snapshot, modifying those attributes to make it public. It's really just a repeat of those API calls. So looking through here, there's nothing to me to indicate that this user did have the ability to go ahead and pivot. Obviously, if there were stored credentials in those instances, because the instance didn't have an IAM role, that could be something where they would be able to potentially pivot. Going back into here, and now the deeper forensics. And we're not going to do this as part of this. I'm going to just go ahead and do a quick summary. But the reason is the detailed forensics is like, what are some other kinds of things that you might look for? We'll do this one. Let's look for any denied API calls, because that is worth doing. And then we're going to finish up, and I'm going to describe the actual incident itself. We're going to add this as another query window. This is great. This is one of the things I like, is being able to have these multiple query windows open. And I'm going to pull off this time. Normally we time base this one. I'm not going to do it because I don't want to do my time calculations now. And I do need my table name. Get that from the other query here. And we'll paste the table name in. Error code denied. So this is going to give me every denied API call that has occurred in this account over the last 3 months because we only have 3 months of logs and they're not optimized logs. I'm going to run it and we'll see how long this one takes. It may only take about 45 seconds again. As predicted, it took 45 seconds and you start to see denied API calls. So, or API calls where there were various errors. And that's kind of interesting because I didn't expect to see, unauthorized operation. Let's look at, did I put the date here? So this is my stuff trying to do some things and a little while ago is my guess. Do I have the date time? No. Let me go ahead and rerun this one with the date time. And actually, I'm not going to run that because you don't need to know. Your account is going to go ahead and look a little bit different. But you can see there's a range of kind of denied API calls. So that's actually kind of interesting. It's a good one to be able to run where he may actually even show you how to set that up as a threat detector, although it can be very noisy. Okay, going back to my recipe picks here, we've actually run through all of the queries. So once I break that down, I showed you a little bit of manual, but we had 4 different queries, all pulling same data or different data. And I really do encourage you to play around with these and to pull different ones. But the objective was just to show you kind of the start to finish of that process. And we do have a pretty good sense of what occurred here. So if I go back up and I'm going to walk through the story, what is the current state of the resource? It was a public snapshot of an instance. Didn't investigate what that instance was because it's not there anymore. And that's something we'll get into the details of later. Doesn't really matter. It was public. Now it's not public. What events occurred? Well, it looks like just an IAM user described all the instances, found one, and then went ahead and made that one public. If you look really carefully at what I did, the Lambda code is all hard coded, so it's only going to do this on specifically named instances that match your account ID. What were the changes? Well, because that was a new instance, or a new snapshot that wasn't public and then was public, we don't need to kind of go through the changes on the resources. And really, we're not set up to track all of the changes because that tends to end up costing a little bit of money. We only have the event logs. We don't actually have the like Amazon config or a CSPM tool would actually give you the inventory to track that. Who did that? It was an IAM user. That IAM user had pretty limited permissions, but big enough that it allowed it to describe all of our instances and create snapshots. The permissions of the identity, I mentioned that a second ago. The permissions of the resource, which would be the instance or the snapshot, those had no permissions. Was it public? It was public. What other API calls came from that IP address? We could track all of those, and we saw that it all came from a Lambda function. And that gave us a little bit more info about where this started. In a real incident, I'm going to track down where did that Lambda function come from, who owns it. And then what other API calls came from that calling identity? Not much, just get caller identity. It was really just trying to figure out what were my permissions. Everything else we were kind of able to track. Oh, and it also had that describe instances. Were there any indications of a pivot? No. And then we would dig into the detailed forensics. Largely what I'm going to figure out is what was exposed in that instance. And if I did a little bit more playing with the queries, and this would be your next challenge, see if you can track the source instance or what that snapshot came from, and then who created or what was potentially inside of that instance. Went through it all quickly. Again, we're just going through the familiarization of the process. We're going to do full incident investigations later, but I wanted you to play more with the queries, see the different fields, and get a chance to run all of this on your own. I hope it was interesting, and we'll talk to you again soon.